You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. It has been a long, cold winter in more ways than one, and I am thrilled to shake off the bleak void that Cemetery Confessions has left in its absence. As always, I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host, Trey. On this episode, we welcome Vincent and Victor. Vincent is the entity behind Gothe Residency of the Arts. It is a in-development artist-in-residence experience tailored for the dark creative spirit. And Victor is one of the visionaries of the project. Both are artists in their own right. In the first half of this episode, we're going to talk largely about the Gothe Residency of the Arts. What is it? What are the aims? What are the ancillary projects? And how does this conception of a dedicated space for goths and dark creatives take shape? In the second half of the episode, we're going to broaden the scope and debate things such as the use of AI art, share our perspectives on the philosophy of art, and we'll discuss whether goth has lost its transgressive edge over the years and become too safe, too predictable. So let's get into introductions. Vincent, if you don't mind beginning, tell us how you were introduced to goth and sort of what your path to the subculture has been.
My name is Vincent Goth. I am the founder of Gothe Residency of the Arts, which is an upcoming artist residency program tailored to the dark creative spirit. I am first and foremost an artist in many respects of the term. Predominantly, though, I am an illustrator and poet. I am driven by the philosophy of art as a means of alchemy, that being the practice of transforming raw experience into visual or articulate triumph. Art is a compulsion, a lifestyle, and a deeply personal, unique process to each and every human experience. I can expand on that infinitely, honestly. I am also an arts and poetry instructor, and now formally a graveyard shift museum attendant. Lots of interesting stories there. Which I can get into later if we have the time. Over the past few months, I've been transitioning to working on GROTA and its affiliated projects full-time, so no longer teaching or working at the museum, unfortunately, but it's good to channel more of my energy into my business, I suppose.
Right.
As for how I got into goth, I would say it was very organic evolution for me. I've always been dark-spirited in nature, and I would say that that's manifested in my lifestyle for as long as I can remember. So I've been all iterations of alternative, not to get into any in particular, but I found myself drawn to the literature, the aesthetics, fashion, decor, the philosophy, and, of course, the music. I've never let labels lead my becoming, more so my art and affinities, but I do wholly recognize a significant portion of my lifestyle integrating with elements of the Gothic identity.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing,
Yeah.
and thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Victor, would you like to share your journey into goth?
I'm Victor Lockhart. I'm a YouTuber and a hairdresser, which is a slightly unusual art form to take up, I think, if you're Gothic, but, it's each to their own. I have been interested in goth for a very long time in terms of the aesthetics, the literature. I think Gothic is a better term for what I'm interested in rather than goth. I feel like goth can restrict that aesthetic a little bit. I think people associate that with certain things. And for me, I'm more dark academia, that kind of style of things.
Mhm.
But I've always been interested in the art and the literature, and most importantly, the filmmaking side of things as well, because I come from a filmmaking background.
Oh.
But I got into goth and gothic inspirations really from my mum, who was already quite a gothic person. And so she raised me very alternatively from the very beginning. I used to be dressed in Victorian morning clothes when I was very little. You know, I had no choice in the matter. I was going to be alternative. A little bit of a Addams Family upbringing, which I'm very grateful for. And thank goodness I actually did want to assume that lifestyle when I was older, because I wouldn't have had any choice. My mom doesn't really dress that way now, but she did very much so when she was younger, and I think that had a huge influence over me when I was little. We've always been surrounded by it, so yeah, I didn't really have much choice in a way, which sounds funny, but it was just, you know, I love it. I feel very happy in this aesthetic. I feel like I found myself in the darker side of life, and I like it that way.
I love to hear that. I've heard more and more in recent years of goths who had parents that were either goth or alternative. And when I was younger, that was unheard of. So it's really lovely to see that kind of blossoming now. Well, let me ask, is obviously art is going to be a huge driver of the conversation in this episode. So if I did want to ask about sort of your journey into art, where that started for you, what interested you about art, and why that was meaningful and continued on in your life.
Foremost, I love this question. When I was a teacher teaching art and poetry, I would always lead our class discussions with that. And my students were a lot younger, but they always had so much to say on this. And it's very fascinating learning what art means to each and every individual person. But for me, my history with art, I grew up with selective mutism, and that is a severe anxiety disorder that rendered me unable to talk in public social settings. So art emerged as my voice. It was the only voice I had for the first 21 years of my life. And because of that, I would say my art has always existed as a powerful means of communication for me. And a lot of my philosophy emerges from that, of course. I would describe my illustrations as being an abstraction of my experiences, infused with deeply personal sentiments and emotions. I do believe it takes getting to know me quite personally to understand the depths of my art. But generally, my artwork could be described to others as being romantic, gothic, and homoerotic. And
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and incredibly powerful. Yeah. Victor, would you like to share?
You know, it's amazing to hear that. I really believe that art is a wonderful form of expression and can really, you know, take people out of their shell. And I think that's really special. I think, in a way, being brought up, like I say, in a kind of Addams Family situation, not exactly to the letter, but I've always been surrounded by art, and it's going to sound very like I've had this golden childhood, but my mum was very much into making my daily life very aesthetically pleasing. And so I was always dressed very well. I always had beautiful bedrooms. I would always have murals on my walls. She would always read me old grim fairy tales. I was surrounded by art in many forms. I mean, you know, because my mum is an artist. She was actually a mirror gilder and maker. She used to make big gilded mirrors for big houses. That was her job. And even her creating these mirrors in the kitchen, and she would have them in the hallway waiting to be taken away. That for me was a source of inspiration from a very young age, because it was like I was living in a grim tale or a fantasy story where I was this, you know, prince in a castle. I always had a very vivid imagination, and I do blame my mum primarily for that. But I think it really made me want to seek out more of those. Again, I suppose maybe the Grimm tales are a perfect example where they are fantastical, but they're also dark.
Right.
And so the darkness in art has always grabbed me. There's a certain fascination I've always held with that. And I think being surrounded by it at a young age, and being influenced by it, I guess it has a sense of comfort to me. And so I always wanted to recreate. I mean, I began with drawing and painting when I was really young. It was my primary obsession, I suppose you'd call it, when I was younger. And it developed later into filmmaking, framing things, lighting things in a certain way to bring across a certain emotion. Also with makeup and clothing and creating, I guess, in a way, becoming walking art, which sounds very up myself. And I don't mean that in a way that I think I'm, the best thing on two legs, but, becoming your art, being able to dress in a way where you feel like you're part of a grim tale or a fantasy story. It's all part of that for me. Art is a way of living in a way.
Mm.
I guess I have to comment, just sort of touching on what Vincent was saying with art being a communication style, and then Victor, what you were saying with being a walking arts thing. You kind of backed away from that as you're not trying to self-aggrandize, but as a communication medium, it's not necessarily about being aggrandized as being great. It's about that communication. So as you're expressing your walking artistic nature, I didn't get the impression you were saying that I'm this gift to the world. It's I am communicating by my very presence. I don't need to open my mouth. I just need to exist in the world in a certain way, and the way I've shaped my being is a form of that communication.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But I always feel like I want to cover myself so that people don't think I'm just saying, "Oh yes," But I think you're right. I think, and as someone who appreciates that kind of art, you can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I would hope most Goths would understand that. Yeah.
Yes.
So the big project here that you're all working on is the Gothic Residency of the Arts. It's a very ambitious project and something we're going to talk about from a few different angles. But for, the sake of those who don't know what that is, can you kind of explain what it is, how that idea came to be, and where you're at with that pursuit?
Yes, and I will start off by addressing one of our most common misconceptions, and that is that it is Gothe Residency of the Arts with an E, representing my last name, not exactly the Goth identity or lifestyle or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It does. I think it's important to distinguish that, just because we're more encompassing of dark-spirited individuals, and we kind of want to avoid it ever being gate-kept, so more people feel welcome, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. Gothe Residency of the Arts, or GROTA, as you'll hear us refer to it, is an artist in residence experience tailored to the dark creative spirit. It is currently still in its fundraising phases, but it is an expansive project, and we have a growing, loving community and many patrons behind it, supporting us every step of the way. GROTA's many fundraising initiatives, and I say many because GROTA has expanded into several affiliated projects, but GROTA's many fundraising initiatives are all being funneled towards the eventual purchase of and renovation of a historic neo-Gothic or Gothic revival manor to host the program in. The funds we are raising will help me get the residency started so that I can offer rooms, meals, comfort, and a unique creative experience for artists looking to live in residence. And I will expand later on what exactly an artist residency is, but it is a very big and important creative opportunity that a lot of artists, in my opinion, need to revitalize their spirit in this age. As most wonderful things do, the concept first emerged in my dreams, fragments and recurring themes appearing in my art, which I think can be traced back just looking at my digital presence and the portfolio I have out there. But that was, of course, never satiating enough. As someone deeply compelled by the arts, I am driven by the philosophy of living artfully. Sculpting out this dreamlike place into reality means a lot to me, and means a lot to a lot of other people as well. GROTA emerged as my response to the historical lack of modern creative places tailored to dark spirited creatives. It is, for myself, and I believe for many of our community members, a sort of beacon of possibility and inspiration. It's evolved a lot through the past year, but always for the better than I could have ever imagined. And we're still in what I consider to be the early stages of my business model. We've come a long way.
I just wanted to affirm that I can see the dedication and hard work and vision that's gone into working on the foundations of this project. It's clearly in good hands and has a lot of people that care a lot about that vision. So I can definitely see that.
I'm very glad that comes across. Yes, it's been less than a year since we've been public about it, but I've of course been working on it much longer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe I've introduced Victor's relation to the project, but Victor is here with us because he has one of my, we call them founding visionaries, basically a team member of GROTA who's been with me from the beginning.
I still remember the email, actually. I remember It was the day I was working in the salon because, like I mentioned before, I'm a hairdresser, and it was a lunch break. And I remember opening my emails. And at first, I actually thought it was a spam email. I'm sorry, Vincent, to admit this to you now.
Oh, I'm sure many did.
But when I opened it, said, I forget the subject now of the email, but it was something like collaborative or something. It was that word. And I think because I have a YouTube channel, I get all these spam collaborative things all the time that I literally go into my emails and delete repetitively. So I opened this one. I thought, this looks a bit different. So I actually sat and read through it. And I thought, this doesn't seem like a spam email. This is someone who genuinely has a project and they've genuinely watched my videos because they've referenced some of them. And, and it was a really refreshing thing to me in the sea of spam collaborative emails to actually have someone who was a real person, who had a real idea and a real vision and obviously had a lot of passion for something. And that at the time for me, because I really needed something to focus on and for someone to believe in my art, because I've been on YouTube for a long time and, you know, creating on social media. And it's one of those things that can take your soul away slowly. And it's nice to have someone come to you and say, what you do, I believe in what you do. I'm seeing what you do. I see your art and it speaks to me and I want you to be a part of my art. It's, you know, it's that ultimate, you know, compliment as an artist when someone else finds what you do and says, I see you, you know. So yeah, I still remember that day that I got the email, which is a year ago now, did you say, Vincent?
And what a treat is that you responded to that email. It was quick. Like I saw you in my vision and I just knew we were going to do some wonderful things together. And you've done so much for the project. For those,
it's been fun.
Yes. For those listening in, he's directed a few of our, what would I call it? Outreach videos, I suppose. Videos explaining the project, just trying to help us build our community and support over on Patreon.
Because my background was always from a visual arts side of things where, you know, I'm very, you know, versed in creating short videos or imagery that can bring across an idea. And that is my chosen art. Not that I enjoy other forms of art as well, but it's my main focus is using a camera and lighting and shots. So it's been really wonderful for me to try to bring across the feeling of GROTA. Obviously, it's not a physical place at the moment, but it will be. And that's something that I really wanted to help Vincent with, is to kind of get the idea that this is me walking around somewhere that could be GROTA, or, you know, just to give off the idea aesthetically and the feeling aesthetically to people so that they could then feel, you know, that this is a possibility, that, you know, all of this can happen.
my driving belief was always that uniting artists and artist dreams was the key to making this a reality.
Mhm.
Just because artists are such a powerful force, and bringing them together really does ensure the success of projects like this, I feel.
I wonder, I don't know if either of you have pursued a formal academic educational
A degree?
track. Yeah. Because I wondered if, as GROTA is meant to be, if there was an element of functioning as like a maybe informal classes or some form of like pedagogical element in teaching, or is it more of a retreat kind of thing rather than a alternative to a formal education?
So to answer your question, yes, I have a degree in illustration. I will not expand on where exactly I got my degree from, because I don't necessarily believe in those really how would I describe it? Uppity art colleges.
You don't
It
believe in the
wasn't a great.
importance of pedigree.
Yeah. I think that the true reason that GROTA's got this far, and I personally have found the success I have, is from my own drive. I really wasn't taught this. I do owe a bit of the business, a bit to the business classes I took, though. I had some really exceptional professional professors, and they helped me get GROTA up and running. But yes, I do plan to channel a lot of my experience teaching and academic knowledge into GROTA. Though I don't believe classes will be a mandatory thing. It'll be more or less mentors will be available, that being through rotating visionaries living in residence or myself. Just something that I can channel my personal and expanding resources as a host into.
I did kind of sort of in this, before we completely move on from that, I kind of wondered what you see as the creative benefit of visiting a residency versus, personal study, personal expression, smaller groups. What are some of the benefits of having this space for artists to come?
The overwhelming benefit of a residency is the immersive experience that they offer. Everything from your environment to the people you surround yourself can affect your creative process, and does affect it. There is an importance of live artist interactions in a shared space, and a lot of residencies are based around that, but ours sort of expands into territory that we really haven't seen come across before. Art is a transformative medium, and it's essential to invigorating the spirit.
I was just going to say, I feel like it's also the benefit of being able to meet other artists who are interested in a similar medium or style to you. I think that's something that we're really missing, especially nowadays when it's so online based. Having a place where you can go which suits your aesthetics and your kind of fundamental beliefs, and you meet other people who are quite, not necessarily exactly the same as you, but people that you can feel a kind of symbiosis with. That is so special, and it's something we are so missing nowadays, is that connectivity. Even though art really is quite an individual and reclusive thing to do, there's such an amazing thing of finding other people that know how you feel about the world, or that's why I think this residency is really interesting, because other residencies are out there, but there aren't residencies that focus on, like Vincent says, the dark creative spirit, that feeling of, and we all know that. I don't need to describe it to you. If you're listening to this and you know what I mean, everyone knows what you mean. If you say dark spirited, it just comes to mind. It brings to mind all of these things: goth and dark academia, vampires, and all these fantasy aesthetics. It all comes to mind. It's not just one thing. And I think having that experience and being able to experience it in real life, not just virtually, that is mind opening and inspiring. And that's something, like Vincent says, can revitalize you and just make you feel so much more inspired about your art that you create, no matter what it is. It doesn't have to be just illustration, it could be anything. It brings you out of your shell and makes you live your art day to day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. I think, well, maybe we'll get into this more in the philosophy section. And I do want to touch on the internet as well, but just kind of thinking about that, for my part, and thinking about GROTA and a residency, I view agents or people, organisms as embedded in the environment. I don't think you can have one without the other. And so the environment you're in plays a large role in how you view yourself and the world and your health, your emotions, your creations. So that interaction with the environment creates new and unique ways of being. And I think in the case of Goth, just for, as a Goth myself, in person, I understand this is broader than that, but I think in person community is such a good way to, as you were saying, kind of bring forth and develop the complexities of that community and interacting intentionally with similar people and objects in the world gives rise to these new configurations and experiences and creates this sort of sense of place and time and action. It's to me as well, I think it's important because it creates this space that is it avoids the content, the artistic content that's kind of mediated by huge corporations, or this sort of like, I guess, acculturated, like general art alternative culture that gets thrown into pop culture as a way to sell products and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a decoration rather than an ideology in and of itself.
Yeah. So I can absolutely see how transplanting yourself into an intentional community or setting, like you said, Victor, creates the possibilities for profound experiences in yourself and your art. Let me so let's talk about the internet a little bit, as that was invoked. We obviously live in the internet age, and so looking at the outlets for artists when it comes to whatever Instagram or whatever other YouTube, these other platforms that kind of revolve around the potential of the god of the algorithm getting your art to go viral and gain popularity rapidly. What's your perspective on these systems and environments when it comes to helping or hurting art and artists?
Because I have quite a lot of personal experience with this. As a creator, I've been creating online and on YouTube since 2015, which is quite a long time ago now, which makes me feel very old. And I've realized over the course of my creativity, it's ebbed and flowed, I think. And at the beginning, I had so much drive because I was always told the harder you work, the more you put yourself out there, the more you will get back. And that's really something that everyone is told, no matter what you do, whether it's online or not. But unfortunately, I mean, that did work at the beginning. And don't get me wrong, the algorithm was a very different monster back then. Yeah. And I think it did pay off. And I made a few videos that did really well, and I got the taste of it. I got the taste of success. And I thought, right, I'll just do this more. I'll do this more. And it became more about the interaction than the art. And I think that is something that is so dangerous. And it is the thing that has become the main focus of so many content creators now. It is less about what you're making and more about the reaction. And you see it everywhere. You see it on TikTok, you see it on Instagram. You see these videos which are basically nothing videos. You could be filming the sky with nothing in it. But if you put a caption on it and you circle it in red and you put an arrow and you say, you will not believe what you will see in this video, then you'll get 20 million views. Whereas I could I could write a poem, a 20-minute long poem, make a film for it, do the costumes, the makeup, the acting, the directing, the lighting, all that. I could spend this piece of my soul and getting it out there, and no one would click on it, because it's not really relative to how much work you put in it. It's what the algorithm likes, and if that isn't getting views, then it makes you start to question the quality of your art. And really, I could go on and on about this, but really the thing that we want as artists is that feeling of understanding, of someone, even if it's just one or two people, seeing your art and saying, wow, this spoke to me. This brought something out that I feel, that I know that you feel. And I think even though art is a very individual thing, that's what you want. You want to be understood by showing your art. And what we all want is basically an applause. We want an applause of some kind, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if the algorithm is hiding our content from, because it doesn't have a big circle and an arrow and a, a shot of the sky empty, and that's what the algorithm wants, then it's not going to be seen. And I think that's the thing we're all fighting against, is to be seen. But fundamentally, the point that I want to make, and any artist listening, is do not think about the response. Think about your art. It's not about the response. If you start to get into, I've only got 3 comments, then when you've got 1 million comments, it won't make a difference, because really it's about how you feel about your art. All that attention isn't actually going to make a difference to you. And that's something I've learned, is you'll just want more and more and more. And it's like an addiction. Yeah. Whereas if you're proud of what you've made, if that 20-minute poem, if I'm proud of that poem and I've got it out there, and maybe 10 people have seen it and gone, I really like this, then that is success. And again, the algorithm might not like us for it, and it might not make us £1 million, but fundamentally, as an artist, how many artists have, it sounds awful, but died penniless? Because that's art is not about making money. It's about expressing that art. And I don't think anyone should die penniless, but it's really important that we still express our art truly and do not feel influenced by view counts and subscribers and comments. And I think that really damages the creative soul.
Yeah, it's kind of the main problem with the at least the current mass media venues, your Instagrams and YouTubes and TikToks and Twitch and whatever, is that they are on the core of it, they're all monetization platforms for some company, and they're often the only easy venue for an artist to get their work out there. And that's great that those things exist, but they're still fundamentally there to make money. Yeah. Whether the artist engages with that part or not, the very platform itself is sort of forcing it down that route. Yeah.
I completely agree with both of you. I think for me, one of the downsides of these networks is the emphasis on speed as a virtue, and sort of generating that, or I guess FOMO being inherent to the platforms. This kind of emphasis on ephemeral and short and punchy content that is meant to be consumed, and then you move on to the next one. Like, I think TikTok is especially egregious for this, but they all are. Yeah. And so
they're all trying to emulate TikTok in that.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
It's the consumerism part of it, which I disagree with. That's exactly what you're describing. It's the disposable nature of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think with art, for me, I think it demands or requires sort of careful thought and reflection and research, and kind of slowing down to take pleasure in the art, to contemplate where and how a work of art reflects on your life and your experiences, and how the environment recontextualizes that. And this sort of Pavlovian response to like 30-second videos and reposting a meme and then going on to the next meme, and this kind of perpetual motion, I think is detrimental to, I mean, our mental health, but just also puts a lot of pressure on artists to kind of pump out content rather than slow down and put their heart into something. You know, and like in contrast to in the sort of like medieval apprenticeships that were, you'd go off to a monastery or somewhere for years and it would culminate in your masterwork that takes all this time to create, and then you would become a master and go off and do your own thing. So it, just as you're saying, it is that sort of neoliberal consumer market ethic that is mediating art, and I think that is a problem. Hello, it is Danny from the future. I just wanted to clarify something as I'm editing this episode. I don't want to imply that it is necessarily the format of content that is the problem. I think short form content can be meaningful, artistic, require a lot of thought and work, and be impactful in profound ways. And I also don't think that content that is vacuous or just silly and fun for the sake of it is inherently bad either. I think what I'm trying to get at is the push from large corporations who are only interested in profit to homogenize the types of art and content that are out there and that get any sort of popularity. As Victor was saying, creates a very stagnant and homogenized media pool. And of course, variety is the spice of life, right? But yeah, like Victor said, I think what I'm really trying to get at is the push from these mega corporations, these billionaires, to direct and control the types of art and content that should be viewed. In line with digital platforms, there is a program at GROTA called the Web Syndicate, which in the sort of description mentions the importance of physical engagement in the world. Can you speak about what that is and why that was an important project for you to take on?
The Web Syndicate aims to unite fellow dark spirits who share a passion for and wish to explore the art of the written letter. The Web Syndicate was created as one of GROTA's many community-enriching efforts. In offering this platform, we aspire to reignite a passion for holistic, artful expression amongst dark-spirited artists. A big emphasis of the project is traditional connection and media. So there's an importance of reviving traditional art forms, and written letter being one of them. It is a dying art form.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And I think that fits neatly into everything we've kind of been talking around as well. So it's, I think, an important, again, emphasis on community, sort of the physicality, materiality of working with objects rather than digital platforms primarily.
Yeah,
I think
fostering tangible connections and memories.
Right.
I feel
right.
So at the moment, we're only offering this program through our Patreon. Just a lot of the projects we do are significant portion is not visible. My team and I do put a lot into these projects.
You know, with this sort of residency, obviously there's a stated intentionality to the aesthetics and the modalities and the types of art that are being maximized, promoted. And whenever you are creating a community, there has to be, I think, thought put into inclusivity and diversity. What do we allow? What do we not allow? What are the values around that? And so I wondered what that looked like for you, why that was important for you.
Well, I think really alternative art and alternative lifestyle in general attracts a lot of different people. And I think often people who feel outside of society in many ways. I mean, me, I'm trans and I'm FTM, but I'm also queer and I express my gender in a quite a fluid way. I mean, I enjoy makeup, I enjoy different fashions and things like that. And I think really I found myself in those alternative communities. I felt more acceptance within those because everyone who was already in those communities felt like they were either queer or they had queer friends or they had that kind of background where they were more open-minded to different people who aren't, necessarily straight and cis. And I think that's something that I hope would, and will and is carried on in GROTA because many of us are LGBTQIA in many respects and neurodivergent. And I think that's something that has always been at the backbone of GROTA and is something that Vincent has always spoken about is inclusivity. I think as well, speaking about Gothic aesthetics, I think a lot of the time in stereotypical media, it is very, very whitewashed. And that's something which I think should not be promoted. I think that Gothic aesthetics is something that can be expressed by anyone. And I think that should be really clear and definitely is clear in regards to GROTA. I think just being able to be yourself in no matter like who you are, that's such an important thing. And I think really if you are alternative, that is something you're already doing. You're already being this ultimate version of yourself. You're not listening to society and what society wants you to be. So I think that is something that we definitely at GROTA want to bring across. But I think there are factions of goth communities or alternative communities which can be discriminatory.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Very much.
So it's an interesting thing to speak on, really, because I've not personally experienced that as much. But I know it can happen, obviously, with the internet the way it is. I mean, you see everything that goes on.
Right.
So I do know about the discrimination that can happen within alternative communities, which always shocks me because, like I say,
Yes.
I always think alternative people are usually alternative thinking and not. It feels strange to me that discrimination would exist in a community that is all about being different. That constantly surprises me. But again, everyone, holds different beliefs and everyone can be raised a different way or have different influences on them. But I feel like something that is a fundamental backbone of GROTA is we are, we want to be incredibly inclusive. And I think that reflects with our members that are currently founding visionaries already. We're a very different bunch of people. And I think we all try to weigh in our different ways to educate each other, I hope, with inclusivity.
Well, Vincent, would you be able to speak a bit to the dark market and sort of, we're kind of talking about community and the importance of that. Can you share a little about what that is, why that came to be, what role it plays in the community?
The dark market sort of emerged as one of GROTA's many fundraising initiatives, but there are a lot of different facets to it. A big part of it is integration of community and art, so bringing artists together in one space and connecting under that, which has always been a very important part of GROTA's becoming, is being so closely connected with our community, growing alongside them. The dark market has a huge role in fostering connections with the dark-spirited community. The GROTA Dark Market is an avant-garde artist market hosted by GROTA and myself. I'm leading the predominant half of it. We have a few visionaries pitching in to help me with it, but I do most of the venue planning and the application process. And we're going to be hosting this across various cities in North America and hopefully eventually Europe. sort of to parallel locations where we might be basing the residency program, because as of now, it's of course not based anywhere. And so it would be a good opportunity to explore the creative communities in those areas and see what options there are. GROTA Dark Market will feature a selection of dark spirited vendors, artists and illustrators, oddity makers, curiosity enthusiasts, musicians, and more, drawing a crowd passionate about the dark arts and community. We had an event in Tucson, Arizona, back in November, a much smaller event, mind you. But we had live music. I believe we had around 12 vendors. We had a live gallery going in one of the rooms. We had live tattooing as well, which was a nice feature, I thought. Yeah. But basically, the dark market is my way of expanding on that. My team and I saw real potential in what came of that experience. And as of now, it's looking like it's going to be really successful. We have over 150 vendor applications open right now. Slowly getting more musicians lined up, so we have live music playing at each of the venues. Hoping to do a few other special things later on in the market. So by the time we get to Salem, and there is a list on our website under Dark Market, but by the time we get to Salem, we're hoping to host a joint masquerade, integrate a few other events that dark spirited folks might be into.
I love that. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I love those types of events as well. All the sorts of things I would be into. Yeah. Every time I hear, I don't know if anyone has watched this, but every time I hear,
I know what you're going to say.
Arizona,
Tucson, Arizona.
Immediately go to Jackie Day. Yes, exactly.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that, because I was bursting to just go Tucson, Arizona, because it's Arizona.
Arizona. Oh man, so good.
This is the way we talk in Tucson, Arizona.
The goth scene there is amazing. I will say I had, and this is going to sound terrible, but I had never met another goth person before I began GROTA about a year ago, the public part of it, and I had never met another goth person in person until Tucson, Arizona, and that was really magical experience connecting.
Oh, fantastic.
With people like me. So
yeah.
closely.
Oh, I can imagine.
Was Laszlo there? Because I hope he was.
Yes, actually.
Good.
The real human bartender.
The real human bartender.
I am just a regular human guy.
So that's wonderful. I'm really, those types of events are so important in so many different ways. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, obviously. So I always encourage everyone who can go to and support those things, or even may have time to get involved behind the scenes to do that, because that really is in a lot of ways the lifeblood of our subcultures. So that is really wonderful.
And I know there are a lot of artists and musicians connected to, shall I refer to it as the Belfry Network or Cemetery Confessions?
The Belfry Network is both. I mean, both. Yeah. So
that is to just extend that we are looking for all sorts of talents at this market, and everyone is welcome to reach out to me personally. I would love to arrange around that. I suppose
I'll keep that in mind. Yes.
Yeah, networking is a huge thing for me. I love it. I love connecting with artists and creatives.
Well, so without having any relevant segue, let's move on to I suppose the most salient debate in the art community right now, which is around the use of AI, so-called AI, to create AI generated art. So, I suppose I could ask what your general opinions on that are. I kind of wanted to see if you thought that has any place in artistic endeavors, as if you feel like it can make art more accessible for people who aren't artistic, or is it all bad all the way around? What are your thoughts around this?
I will start off with a quote I saw the other day, and that was it should be referred to as AI generated images and nothing more. There isn't any art there. Art is a means of expression. It has a lot of passion and emotion before it, and AI art is rather hollow in comparison. But to expand on my own personal philosophy on it, what I predominantly look at is the artist's spirit itself when it comes to art and the creation of art. Art is about process. The finished product is such a little fragment of the creation, the alchemical transformation. I think that a no, historically, AI art is just an amalgamation of other artists' stolen artwork alike, and it sort of takes away, it disconnects the humanity of it, and referencing other artists is a part of art, especially perceived masters like historical artists. That's only human, but AI art goes the other another step over that, and it just disconnects all of the artist's name and the history behind it and the process and spits out an image, I suppose.
Sorry, I was just going to weigh in and say I agree with you. I think there's no creativity behind it. Like you say, it's just a computer process that happens and then creates an amalgamation, a kind of amorphous thing, this like monster out of images that already exist. I think it's an awful thing to think that. I mean, I've seen instances where people have sold this art at a higher price than an artist, a regular artist would charge, and it's just a computer generated image. There's no artist behind it, but it's people that are pretending that they have created these things and then selling them for real money to real people. That's where I disagree with it as well, even more, is you are literally taking artists' jobs, and all of that integrity behind art, it goes away. You're basically saying that it's no longer needed. These people that are using these AI generated, I don't even know the name of them because I don't even want to know, but these programs, it just is the most heartless, soulless, sad thing to think, because that's not the point of art. Like Vincent was saying, art is the process. It's the idea that this thing is in your soul, it's in your mind, it's in your heart. You want to get it out there and show people your creation, and you develop your skills, you get better over time, you choose different mediums, you gain inspiration again from other artists or from the world, but you're not copying and pasting a picture of I don't know, a pumpkin and it's weird the things people combine as well with these AI things. I think people are just bored and they just type in anything like pumpkin with, I don't know, a pink dress on, it always makes me laugh. I remember seeing, is it salmon in a river? And it was literally a piece of salmon in a river. It wasn't even a fish. It was like a piece of meat in a river. And it's like, that's how strange these programs are. People are just bored. They're just typing in words, and it's not an artist process. It's an experiment. It's a computer program. It's a game. It's not art.
And this is coming from two artists, where self-expression is very important to us. So we do, I suppose, have a lot to say on the matter. It's there's a lot of fear amongst art communities that AI is replacing us, and where I don't necessarily believe that's the case. It's definitely a matter that needs to be addressed.
So
yeah, go ahead, Trey.
Yeah, I was going to say, while I don't disagree with either of you in the I guess the core of it, I'm going to push back a little bit on some of what was expressed there around AI art. Now, the fact that it's AI, we've already sort of put that in many air quotes as we've talked about. It's really just another modern evolution of algorithmic art, which has a very long and storied history of creating art based on or at least using as a source of inspiration for the artist to break out of various ruts or of things like that, of a rule-based artistic generative process where the artist lets go of that idea that all artists, or the only valid artistic expression, is that sort of bolt out of the blue that just comes to you in a dream and you can just pour yourself out on a piece of paper. There's probably the most literature around it when it comes to music. Many of the classical composers had methodologies where they would use to create melodic phrases by piecing things together in an algorithmic way. They had a set of rules that if this, then this follows it, and things like that. So that sort of general process, which is really not that dissimilar to what modern day AI art in whatever medium they're talking about is doing, has always been there. And that when you look at the stuff that's released nowadays, especially the stuff that you already mentioned that gets sold, whether it's people in music talking about, well, we finished some unfinished symphony by running it through an algorithm on a computer and having it look at that original composer's oeuvre and determine what their style is, and then give them this fragment and have them flesh it out, or talking about lost works of art, or an artist generating art, say, yes, I used whatever AI program about it. Most of the ones that get any serious consideration, while the news articles that talk about them always seem to talk about, oh, it's computer generated and whatnot, that is almost never actually true. The computer was one of many tools used to generate it, but it is almost always computer generated and human curated art. So the curation aspect of it is sort of where some of the more self-expressive artistic avenues come into it. And most things that, as you were talking about, are just people throwing in random words. That is, as has been expressed, I agree, that's more of a game. That's people who just want to have a little bit of fun, see what silly things computers can come up with. And the danger is that when you look at some of that stuff, the silly game stuff versus the curated stuff, it can kind of be hard when you're looking at the mass market version of art to tell the difference. When you're looking at things like stock photography, things like Muzak, things like, canned writings, that sort of thing that's used as filler in a lot of stuff, it's definitely going to chew into that market, which has always been a market that a lot of artists have railed against anyways, that sort of mass marketization of artistic product that's then being used as I guess a generic form of expression to fill space on a web page or in an acoustic environment in like a shopping center, that sort of Muzak stock photography kind of thing. That's what I personally think is what's most endangered. That whole marketplace is most endangered by this soulless,
it's a cheaper alternative art that doesn't involve a real person and a real wage.
Right, exactly. And I think it's going to be mostly stealing that as an avenue. And a lot of serious artists use that as a way of making ends meet. It's a quick money making thing to do more superficial avenues of art to help fund the serious stuff that's not maybe as readily marketable. Mm-hmm. So, and that does, at least in the modern marketplace of ideas, now that we don't have the idea of patronage as strongly, although with things like Patreon and stuff like that, it's sort of coming back. Or even OnlyFans, things like that is bringing sort of the patronage model in a little bit again, but the old classical model when it comes to painters and composers and whatnot of you get attached to some sort of royal family or a rich patron who then lets you have free reign to do whatever you want as long as they get first dibs on your art and they can present it as, oh, well, this is something that my patronage has brought into the world, and it's self-aggrandizing from that standpoint, but the artists themselves are allowed to express themselves. So I don't feel it's that much of a threat to that sort of serious communicative artist, because as you said, it's not actually communicating anything. if it's done in very much a pat, hey, I just type in something random and this is what pops out. But there is a place for it when it comes to people who have great ideas but might not have technical capabilities, to bring them into fruition, especially when it comes to visual media, but also in musical avenues as well. Someone who's maybe a great poet but not a great singer, but doesn't want to collaborate with something, using something that can actually sing your lyrics and you can customize it, is beneficial. And some of the same arguments have been made historically with the advent of, to hit with sort of your focus, Victor, the advent of filmmaking and photography, was viewed as something that was destroying art to the painters and the like there, who it was a physical skill to put this image, and now you had a machine that could capture something.
Because it was the masters that could capture a smile and the skin tone of a royal member of family, for portraiture art. And then obviously if you can just take a photograph, well, yes, you have stolen that person's job. And it's a funny thing, isn't it, when you think of it like that?
Right. So, I mean, historically speaking, I think this is the new scary thing.
Yeah.
And there is always going to be a danger to it. Any sort of new technology is always going to be a danger, and it's going to negatively impact certain people. But I think once it's understood better, it can be used like cameras were, like the phonograph was, like even writing was, because writing was denigrated back in the ancient times as a something that was ruining discourse and thought when it was a discursive environment and you were in the Greek forums and it was all about discussing things. When you could write it down, all of a sudden, well, that cheapens it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been happening forever. So this new tool is coming out. We need to figure out how it fits in. I don't view it as an existential crisis, but it is something that needs to be taken seriously and figured out.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective, actually, because I've not actually heard anyone talk about it like that. But it's a funny thing. I think the main issue as well with AI is there needs to be more laws surrounding it. I think, in terms of copyright, but also I think in terms of people's rights, because I think a lot of AI art can actually steal people's identities. And obviously we've seen that where they actually take people's faces and people's identity, and then obviously
revenge porn.
Yes, things like that. I mean, there's been the Taylor Swift outcry recently with all that going on.
Yeah, I read about that.
So, there are restrictions that obviously have to be put on these things. And like you say, it is a tool that I think could be used for certain things, but it would have to be, like you say, human curated, like, made sure it was put through, basically a bit like fire. It's a good servant, but a very poor master. So, we have to use it like a flame. You have to be able to use it for a purpose, but not let it overwhelm the, art as a medium, not let it take over, so much so that it's taken away all of that. And
it's not the thing itself.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, though.
If I can throw in a couple thoughts quickly, I do. So yeah, obviously, Trey, I agree with you that I don't like the term AI. I think I saw somebody equate that to the term organic, that it's basically just a marketing term that doesn't really mean what it actually means.
Yeah, it's mostly just, it's misunderstood because they have literal meanings, but the popular understanding of it is completely flawed, both organic and AI, really.
A few of my largest issues with AI are, first of all, the energy consumption. So there was this MIT article about how one AI image in certain software generators can create as much energy or use as much energy as charging your phone to full, and 1,000 images produce as much carbon dioxide as driving over 4 miles in a car. And these models are used millions or billions of times a day. Like, I'm in the camp of, and when it comes to global warming, that shouldn't really be put on individuals, because the vast majority of those emissions and issues are created through pollution by large corporations, but these systems and a lot of the AI generators are either bought by or created by large corporations. So there isn't the only driver there is profit, not any sort of ethics. Another issue that Victor, you brought up was about sort of AI images replacing artists. And I know I've seen articles about like Disney doing this and Wizards of the Coast doing this and other companies sort of firing artists they had on staff and then hiring just a few people to kind of touch up AI generated stuff because it's cheaper, obviously. And for me, I see this as sort of making obvious the soulless, mechanistic, capitalist machine that even in their sort of marketing art, they're trying to convince us to buy something with, sort of reflects that cold, inhuman nature.
Yeah.
That is taking from the working class just to increase profit. And, I'm not necessarily opposed to technology replacing labor, but the issue is the labor that's replaced there's no system in place to allow you to live if you are replaced, first of all. And then I think out of everything, art specifically, it seems like that's the last thing you would want to automate with technology because it is in a lot of ways a reflection of, colloquially, the soul of humanity, I think.
Yeah.
And then also the last thing would be what you brought up is just the use of the pool of images they're drawing from are copyrighted images that are just stealing from artists. And it's this has been happening forever. Companies like Facebook and Google, they're set up to sell our personal data. And so I think we kind of let it go in a lot of ways because we think, well, here's this system that we can use and is practical and useful in some ways. But I see AI images going down the same direction of it's just a mega corporation looking for profit and creating profit through selling other people's creations and commoditizing that. And so I think that's another big issue for me.
Definitely. And I think at the moment you can still spot an AI image usually by looking at how many fingers the person has in the image. Or there's becoming
less and less true, however.
But again,
yes.
that's what I was just about to say but that won't be the case forever. And I think that is the scary part is at the moment we're like, oh, look at that AI art. That's definitely AI art. But it will get harder and harder and harder. And that will be the problem. People will lie and they will say, oh yes, I spent 10 hours painting this in oils. But they really, it's like, no, it's an AI piece of art, but obviously we won't be able to tell at one point. It'll get smarter and smarter. And I think, it's such a difficult thing to, know what the right thing to do about it is. But I think, like I was saying before, as long as there are restrictions and there are laws and there are safeguarding elements to this, these programs, that's the important thing, I think.
If I may, and I think this is my main concern with AI art that I just wanted to be sure I touched on, and it is that it's not a source of inspiration. It definitely is, and it can be a helpful tool for many creatives, but raw AI generated images remove all traces of humanity, history, love, emotion, everything that traditionally comes with art and the artist behind it. The programs are trained on stolen, uncredited artists and artwork. So you don't get to learn anything about what exactly is going into all that data, forming that image. I think understanding where the image is coming from, what's behind it, is particularly important. when it comes to the
Yes.
creative process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Goths intuitively understand that because there's so much of an emphasis on that sort of understanding the lineage, the canon. Where did this come from? How did this develop? And that being an important part of creating a meaningful substance to what you're participating in. I wanted to ask about your kind of personal philosophy on the creation of art and its role in the world. Some different ways of viewing that are art as a representation, or art as an imitation of the world. It could be an expression of the artist that reflects their identity, or more of a art for the sake of something meant to be enjoyed and pleasurable. But there's many different ways to think about this, and I wanted to get your opinions on that.
Yeah, I think for me personally, art, like you were saying before when we were talking about AI art, I think art for me is such a deep human need. And I think if you can go back and look at cave paintings and realize that we've always wanted to express something with what we've had around us, like whether it be a bit of mud on the ground and we're putting it on the walls, it's this deep human desire to create. And I think it'll always be important to humans, I think, to be able to express that part of themselves. And I think, for me anyway, I always expressed it in this way because I write a lot of poetry, and that's something I really enjoy, but it's also a kind of need, I have to do it, I have to I have to eat food, I have to write poetry, which sounds really strange in a way, but it's almost as if it's like an emotion I don't know how to get out other than just by expressing art. So for me, if I have, I don't know, a feeling I need to get out there, I write a poem and I feel like I then get it out there. It's like if I didn't write this poem, I'd burst. It's this feeling of a part of your soul needs to express itself in this way. And obviously for everyone, it's different. It might be painting or drawing or, doing a makeup look or sewing or embroidery or, going out and doing a monologue. But it's all the same feeling. It's that feeling of I must create. It's this deep need, I think. And I think even if you aren't necessarily a creative person by nature, I think we all have a way of getting that feeling out there, even if it's just in the way we present our house or the way we get dressed in the morning, that it's all part of how we live as human beings. We might gravitate towards certain colors or certain shapes, and that for us it brings us joy. And I think art is really the meaning of living. I know that sounds like such a huge statement to say, but really what do? We work to get money to then come back to be in our houses, to enjoy our furniture that's been designed by someone, to enjoy the shows that have been written by an artist who's been performed by actors and lit by someone who understands the artistry of lighting. All of these things are a combination of art, and we live for art. We go to the theater, we listen to music. These are all art forms. And I think if we took away art from the world, we wouldn't have much left, because that is really what we live for. Ultimately, anyone can see that art is such an integral part of existence, even if you aren't an artist. Nearly everyone listens to music, nearly everyone watches the TV, nearly everyone appreciates really good interior design in their own, aesthetic. We all are appreciators of art, even if we aren't creators of art.
I believe I've integrated a lot of my philosophy into the previous questions, but simply said, encompassing myself and GROTA's mission statement to make living and art. That is the goal. And I forget where exactly that quote comes from, but integrating all elements of my life and life with art and creation and matters alike is very important to me.
I think the area of interest I have in the way art interacts in the world is that interaction between the world and art. And I think the way art is generally perceived is that it's like this social construction that's created through discrete components and mediated through technology of some kind, whether even if that's a brush and paint. And then once it's finished, it's generally static. And I think of art as a ever-shifting, dynamic kind of nexus that is enacted through a bunch of interconnected agents. And like, I think the thing that some people think is a bit strange is I view the objects that are the environment, the tools that are used in the process of creating art as just as important and active as the humans behind that, the other organisms behind that, the canvas, the brush, the room you're in, the socioeconomic condition you're living under, the concepts and themes and stories influencing your art. I see as creating this sort of reciprocal web of transactions or relationships. And a painting, for example, I don't see as like this disconnected, static entity hanging on a wall in a gallery. It's an agent acting in the world that functions to actively shape and change the world we live in. And so in a practical sense, kind of when I was saying what I like about GROTA, the idea that because we're embedded in our environment, that you can't separate or understand those two apart from each other, in my opinion. The environment takes part in the creation of art. So that material interactivity between objects and environment and organisms is creating these new variables and these different ways of being in the world. And so having something that's intentional, I think, has a significant impact on that. And then I think it highlights kind of what you were saying, Victor, about the intimacy of art and the transformative power of art. Because if it's as I see it, these dynamic interactions of bundles of practices and organisms, art is then intimately interwoven with the experience of life in a way that generates and changes the world and everything in it. Politics, meaning, like existential meaning, identity, the body, our social communities are all modified by art. And so in that way, like you were saying, art is life and life is art. And I think that puts a lot of value into artists. That's really important.
Absolutely. And I think people forget that. I think people think that art is so secondary in life, but really, if you took that away, we wouldn't be living for very much. That is what we live for. We work to have more time to appreciate art.
For me, just from what I've seen of art and how I look at how art affects the world around it and has done historically, I feel art is the one and only engine of change in the world. Without art, we would simply routinely as individuals be just repeating our day-to-day. There's no getting out of it, because it is through that interaction with the world, through understanding our place in the world with other people and within society and within the greater humanity, is the only way we can see new ways of experiencing the world, and by seeing that, enacting it and get out of whatever ruts we're in. So, I mean, like has been expressed, art is a means of communication. It's a way of understanding one another, and through that understanding, we change as a society. It's not just, oh, this is my experience, this is what I do every day, and I see that, and it works for me, and I just keep doing the same thing because it works best for me. But as you see other people's perspectives, as you understand how other people are expressing things, you get different pathways that open up and allow us to branch out and allow society to change. And really, art has been the thing that has moved the needle in almost every instance historically to change in the world. Is we are doing something a certain way, we have a routine thing, and then something happens, something is expressed through some sort of artistic medium that makes the society as a whole go, huh, that's a different way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move along. And is also why when you're looking historically at entities that for whatever reason, for power or for whatever, have an intent to uphold the status quo because they're on top and they would like to maintain that status quo, one of the very first things they basically try to crack down on is art in every form and nature. So, I mean, that's always been my attitude towards art. It's what allows people to see things in a way that brings them out of their day-to-day life, to see things in a greater sense, gives them that ability to progress and understand that, you know, maybe this thing that has always been the status quo isn't the best thing. It's hard to see that when it's your everyday, but when you see it from a greater perspective, which is the perspective that only art can give an individual, that's when things move.
It's the laxative of society. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I started to have
it always has to get to, it always has to.
It was so deep and meaningful.
And then, felt it all the way into your bowels.
Yeah, it's down there. It's inside me. At least to me, I think one of the purposes of art is to challenge the viewer and society, going back to what you were just talking about, Trey. And I think most people agree Goth, or, you know, these alternative communities, are inherently artistic and transgressive in some way, challenge the perceived norm in some way. So that said, I have seen people make the argument that as a community, Goth has become too safe and kind of lost that. So I think you could take this question in two different ways, depending on what you're most comfortable with. I kind of wanted to touch on the transgressive nature of Goth, but you could also, if you want, to share how you feel about the role of art in challenging society and the viewer, and if you think in some ways art has become too safe or lost that aspect of it, you know, however you want to take that.
I think it's interesting because I think I've not been around very long on this planet. So I feel like Goth has had many iterations and many different eras. And I think from my experience, I've seen a real shift in how you are perceived as someone who is I'm just going to say alternative just to cover most bases.
Yeah.
Because when I was at school, I definitely felt like the only way I could exist was to be alternative, because I just felt so separate from everyone else. And I think it was definitely an act of rebellion, and being able to express that alternative side in myself was a kind of like, it's again, that kind of punk aspect where you are outwardly expressing yourself in your fashion or in your art in a way that is possibly troubling to people, because you want to challenge people's idea of who you are and the power you hold as a person. And I think like Goth and you know, I mean, in school I was like a scene kid and an emo kid, so you know, so you know, I had all these iterations of kind of like that kind of dark spirited inspiration. And I think it's all related, where you use it as a kind of rebellious action. And I think it had a certain power when I was that age. And it may just be purely because I was a teenager, but I feel like there was more strength and power in that identity back then because it wasn't as socially accepted. And I think the issue with Goth now is it has kind of become like, the only way I can describe it is like big titty goth girlfriend. So, right. Yeah. That's the only, and if you know, you know. So the issue is it's become a fetish. It's become an idealized image. It's lost. Well, I'm not saying it's lost it totally, but I think a lot of normies, for lack of a better word, idealize the goth style and the even goth art, goth music, all these things. And it cheapens it, and I think it's become too mainstream in a way, in certain aspects, not entirely, of course, but I think it has lost some of its rebellious energy that it used to have, because it is now more desirable. It's not as separate from accepted society. It is now, ooh, like everyone wants a goth girlfriend kind of thing, and we see that online all the time. And many mainstream media, very rightfully so, now represent more alternative people. But I think in that way, it's becoming more mainstream. It's then becoming less rebellious, less about this kind of almost like anarchy, this idea of change, of being like outside of society. And I think people are less shocked by it, which, may be a good thing. I don't know, but that's what I see now, is it's definitely lost some of its power in a sense, because it's become more normalized.
Like I said, one thing I want to put in is just, there's always a tension. And I think I've reiterated this many times, but there's always a tension between what is the purpose of transgression and what is the intent when one is transgressing. Back to what I was talking about with art being an engine for change. If that engine succeeds, things do change, and hopefully the person who was doing the creative art had an idea in mind of where they'd like it to move to. And if you do that by transgressing because you're wanting to change things from a status quo to something new, and you get to that something new, I don't think it's a bad thing that if you keep doing the same stuff that led to that change is no longer transgressive. That seems to be a win. That being said, what oftentimes happens, and this has also been expressed here with the comments around big titty goth girlfriend and what things like that, is that there's this superficiality of the change where they're changing it on a surface level, but the underlying societal problems that the artist is perceiving and trying to address aren't being addressed. They're changing things around such that fashion models are wearing more black, not in such a way that it's acceptable to confront dark themes and engage with darkness. That's still a taboo in society, no matter how much big star X happens to paint her nails black. So there is that danger of, you need to be able to tell, as you're expressing a desire for change in your art and trying to be an engine for that change, of what are you trying to change? Are you trying to change the paint job on society and just have an aesthetic change that doesn't have any sort of underlying, cultural changes, new things,
like the way some people use cyberpunk?
Yeah. Well, just not even the cyberpunk. The bigger critique is the adding punk to everything. Yeah. When you've got cyberpunk and steampunk and silk punk and diesel punk and solar punk and all this thing, just adding punk to it is defanging the concept of punk. It is. And that's basically, a punk might thought they won because everything is now punk, but someone who understands what punk was trying to actually change knows that punk still has a lot of work to do, but the forces that would like to defang punk in its idea of social change in the direction it wants to go is just going to put punk on everything and say, well, it's punk, so punk won. You have the sort of thing like Obama was president, so racism is over. It's that sort of thing where there's a thing you can point to, like, see, look, change, but it didn't actually fundamentally change anything, or at least not to the degree you would want it to. I think that's the issue.
I'm going to butcher this quote, but I think it was Angela Davis who said something to the effect of that sort of surface level diversity where, like, okay, yeah, so in the government you have now mostly women or people of color, but has the system actually changed? And the system has not actually changed, right? It's just you're putting a facade over it. And she had a very eloquent quote that I can't recall.
Like performative
essentially saying the same
activism.
thing. Right,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, different face, but the same legislation, same
Yeah.
policies,
Yeah.
same processes that this one person may have gotten out of whatever, but the rest of the people who are similar to that person are still struggling with the exact same stuff.
Mhm.
So, yeah, my sort of take on that is I do think Goth has some historically built-in features that create a active resistance to cultural forces. So there's the DIY ethos, both in sort of the individual cultivation of fashion and style, and creating your own thing rather than buying it, and also just in the kind of local businesses that pop up, right? You'll have people in your local Goth community that specialize in creating dresses or jewelry or whatever, and sort of undermines that capitalist expectation of cheap, underpaid labor, poor quality products, that kind of thing. I think there's always been a ethic of creating safe spaces for queer people and women and disabled people and minorities. Obviously, like you said, that's not to say it's never undermined, but broadly speaking, I think there's the potential to resist that heteronormative patriarchy, essentially. As a kid, I know one of the appeals of Goth was that it challenged the sort of respectability politics, the idea that what you contribute can only be valuable, and you can only be a contributing member of society if you fit into the culturally acceptable sets of practices and behaviors. And anything outside that is not valuable. So Goth was my first experience with that kind of thing, and also taking on an alternative view of gender and the acceptance of playing with gender presentation. I think Goth music often challenges religious assumptions and embraces the exploration of mortality and questions the wisdom of authority. And I think there is, I don't want to get too much into the like off the rack alternative, uniform and those kinds of things. But I think that, being in the world in these ways with these signs and symbols and presentations does do something to maximize a certain way of being and minimize other ways of being, and challenge preconceptions and expectations of how the world should be, depending on context. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to that. And I love seeing the way that Goth is adapted across cultures and contexts and is used differently in local communities. And the sort of like just weird performance art that challenges expectations around being prudish or non-sexual, or integrating asexual people or non-monogamous people, or whatever that is. So like you said, Trey, we have talked a lot in the past, and there's a lot to say about the use of Goth more broadly and those kinds of things. But in this specific instance, I just wanted to highlight the ways that I think Goth and alternative communities and events can challenge the sort of bigoted systems that dominate the world, and that I think those aspects of community should be celebrated and encouraged. So
Definitely. It still has power, definitely.
I took a few queer theory and LGBT study courses while at university, and I believe there are several parallels to be drawn between queerness and Gothic or even alternative identity. So I have a little to say in relevance. I'll start with queer theory. If it's very loosely defined, you'll find a lot of different definitions online, but by my understanding of it, at its core, queer theory seeks to question and deconstruct traditional understandings of gender and sexuality. By deconstructing traditional understandings of gender and sexuality and exposing the mechanisms of power that enforce and maintain these norms, queer theory opens up spaces for alternative narratives and expressions. It encourages the celebration and validation of diverse identities and desires, fostering inclusivity, liberation, and social justice. So there are a few intersections between, I'll say, the dark creative spirit rather than goth and the queer identity. And I did several papers on this, so I hope I have enough to say on the matter. Self-expression and authenticity. The universal desire to create unites us all. Dark-spirited and queer individuals often share an exceptional, deep compulsion for artful self-expression. Many artists strive to express their authentic selves, even when it defies tradition or societal expectations. This common pursuit of self-expression and self-acceptance has created a sense of solidarity and connection for many queer, dark-spirited artists. There's also outsider perspectives, which is a uniting term. Dark-spirited and queer individuals have historically occupied marginalized but valuable positions within society, existing outside of societal norms and challenging conventional expectations by nature and or practice. The experience of existing on the fringes has led many to find natural unity in their queer, dark-spirited identity, of which I can relate to prominently. There's also nonconformity and rebellion. Often, the dark creative spirit empowers queer individuals to reclaim agency and challenge societal norms, whether intently or not. These coexisting identities serve as a powerful form of resistance, allowing artists to express their authentic selves and views. Through this, many artists create resonant works that reflect their emotions, desires, and experiences, forging their unique narratives into spaces that otherwise may forsake them. And that's the predominant lot of what I had to say on the matter, but I felt some of it valuable.
No, absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. And I think there's a lot there we could pull apart and discuss, but I don't think we have the time. That's I think leaving it at that is a good place. So with that, I would, first of all, if you can please share, and I'll have links in the show notes, so everybody go look at those. But if you can share where people can find more about GROTA and support the project, that would be great.
The main place I like to funnel people to is our website, because we have just about a collection of all the information, like what the program will actually look like, how you can support us. Patreon is a big outlet where we're raising a lot of funds, and we also have an Instagram, recently a Facebook, which is where we're posting a lot of our exact event details for the dark market. And I believe that would be it. I do also have my own personal Instagram where I post my illustrations as well.
Wonderful. Victor, anything you want to share?
I don't know, really. I mean, I have a YouTube channel, but it's mostly just old videos that I am uploading recently. But I would just say anyone that's listening that feels like maybe they're lacking inspiration and, you know, it's hard at the moment with the internet and everything. And I think I would just say maybe just go back to your roots and try to create in a group of people. And I think that's something that GROTA wants to encourage, is getting out there and actually doing art in a real physical place. And I think there are opportunities for that. There's life drawing classes, there's going out and sketching graveyards and cathedrals and buildings. And I think more than ever, we need to get out there and express our artistic vision. And I think, you know, why wait? Just do it. And I'm trying to do, that's one of my resolutions, is trying to get out there more and just create for art's sake, rather than for, the cold algorithm. Let's forget about the algorithm. Let's just do it for art.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and join us on this episode. It was a complete delight. So
Yes,
thank you both.
absolutely.
It was
Thank
lovely.
you.
It was lovely meeting you all.
Yes, thank you so deeply for having us.
Well, it feels great to be back, to be doing the podcast again. I missed doing this. And because we didn't have an episode last month, I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of content this month. So in 2 weeks, there will be another episode. It's going to be an episode of Music Mausoleum. We'll have a special guest on that episode, a Patreon member who's going to join us in doing an in-depth album review. I will also have probably about a dozen or so albums, singles, EPs that have come out recently that I'll recommend and talk a bit about. So if you're looking for content that is less in the social theory kind of vein, and you want content about music and the importance of music to goth, then that's going to be the episode for you. In thinking about that last conversation we had there about whether or not goth has become too safe, whether or not it's still transgressive, there's a lot more to say there. That could be an entire episode, and maybe it will be. I know in the past we did an episode on the book, The Evolution of Goth Culture, the Origins and Deeds of Goths. I believe our episode was titled The Evolution of Goth, and that focused on a lot of the same thing, right? One of the primary theses of that book is the idea that goth has to be transgressive, or else it is no longer goth. That is a core tenet. That is the spirit, the locus of goth identity and culture. And that was sort of explicated through this neo-Marxist framework. It's an interesting book, and I, as far as I remember, I think we handled it fairly well on that episode. Of course, that was 5 years ago or so at this point. But I know I saw this as a topic at least somewhat recently. There was an article Parma Ham was part of. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I don't remember precisely everything that was said in that article, but I believe Parma Ham talked about how places like Instagram have become problems for goth expression because the algorithms censor certain images, certain topics, certain types of art, and that kind of limits and boxes in what goth is. I think someone else in that article talked about how, it may have been Parma as well, I don't know, talked about how goth music isn't really rebellious unless it's kind of kicking against the music of our parents, essentially, which I think that in and of itself is an entire subject to explore, right? Because what are we rebelling against, the style and or the substance of previous generations' music simply for the sake of rebellion? There's obviously there's an artistic value to changing, modifying, adapting an existing formula. But I don't personally think that a modification or change in a subcultural sound or style simply for the sake of being different, simply for the sake of saying, look, we are not our parents' generation or something to that effect, is a kind of meaningful rebellion. It might be personally fulfilling, but to me, I don't think it creates a kind of change that necessarily betters the world, right? If we're talking about putting more gender fluidity and expression into goth music, or, you know, making some kind of statement about queerness or some form of new existential perspective around death and romance and identity, or some political statement. I think these are things that are worth rebelling and changing historical lineages for. But I also kind of have a controversial take on this, because we've talked about it before. The idea that I don't think there is a mainstream system. I don't think there is a, you know, I use these terms, norms and values and expectations, simply for the sake of ease and being concise. But I don't think there are sort of umbrella norms and systems. So it's not a Marxist view or a functionalist view or a structuralist view, because it rejects the sort of abstracted, coherent entities or forces that are conglomerates of many individual elements that create a culture of homogenized values and identities. If you look at like capitalism, I don't think there is a capitalism. I think there are many capitalisms, and that is expressed and acted out in many different ways and varies greatly from person to person or from group to group or environment to environment. So what that means to me is that there is always a potential for action and behavior to subvert or support any given expectation in any given place, to maximize or minimize different ways of being. So there is no collectively agreed upon goth transgression across borders and organisms and time. I think in this uniform, unvarying, consistent way. Right. So like when we talk about things like systems, I probably would use the term in a more essentially a system being constituted by a set of interdependent processes. I would think of a system as a sort of mental shortcut, but essentially a system would be something that's constituted by a set of interdependent processes. So they're sort of organizationally closed, but structurally open in that they engage in regulated energetic exchanges with the surrounding environment. So it's a set of organisms interacting with themselves, each other, and the environment to sustain and engender a specific practice that generate their own boundaries and individuate processes from their surroundings and within the system that creates itself. So the system creates itself. So they're not like pre-given, predetermined, coherent, consistent, or discrete social structures, but they are continually emerging through relational interactions. So that, in a way, complicates the idea of, well, how is goth rebellious? How is goth transgressive? But goth is transgressive or subversive in the capacity within which you as an agent create through your actions, through your sartorial presentations, through your interactions with the environment, with other people around you, other organisms around you. And those localized maximalizations of being in the world in certain ways, of creating new behaviors, expectations. Again, whether that's visually or ideologically or behaviorally, these acts sustained over time create change beyond our immediate environment. And obviously, the more organisms and objects and agents that participate in these ways of being, the broader and broader that change becomes, the more it spreads. socially. So that's kind of a simplified version of a philosophical view that we sort of, again, talked about in a previous episode called Enacting Goth. So you can go back and check that one out. But it is a bigger conversation. You know, what one person thinks goth becoming safer means for them is going to be different than what another person thinks goth becoming safer means. What one person thinks goth being transgressive means is different from, you know, like how many, maybe you haven't, but I've seen multiple YouTube videos from conservative goths or so-called conservative goths, so-called right-wing goths, saying that, you know, goth being apolitical, which of course doesn't exist, but goth being apolitical is itself a rebellion, a transgression. And obviously I would disagree with that. Many people would disagree with that. But whatever enactment one chooses to bring into the world is going to vary from person to person. So that's a bigger conversation that I think we should have. And this may not have even made any sense, what I just said, because this is, again, post-show musings. So this is simply me reflecting on something that happened in the show that in the heat of the moment I didn't pick up on, or just sort of stuck in my brain and tickled me one way or the other. So this is the rambling bit of the show. I probably should have said that at the beginning of this conversation. But if you've made it this far, hopefully that premise and context is appreciated and you can forgive my sort of intellectual wankery, which I hope is not how this comes off, because I think this is an important conversation. But regardless, that is the end of this episode, and I deeply appreciate you spending your time with us. If you would like to support us and maybe get some bonus content or merchandise, you can head over to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. Again, we will be back in 2 weeks. Hopefully, in the near future, we will have some additional celebratory content for the 10-year anniversary of the podcast. This episode marks the 10th year of Cemetery Confessions, and I'm so grateful to have been able to produce and create this podcast for so long. It was a dream, you know, it was just an idea, something that tickled my fancy. I thought, you know, I had a DJ podcast called The Requiem, and every once in a while I would sort of talk about goth stuff here and there, in between DJ mixes. You know, I tried doing YouTube content to sort of talk about more intellectual goth subjects. And through that process, I thought, you know, somebody should really have a podcast that is long form content where these kinds of subjects can be discussed. And because nobody was doing it, I thought, well, I will just do it myself. I didn't think I was the right person for the job. I still don't think I am. I don't think I'm a very good communicator or storyteller. And because you have chosen to listen to this show, you have chosen to support us and enjoy the content and share it with your friends, I am continually and eternally flattered and grateful and humbled. So I hope to be able to celebrate a 10-year anniversary in 2024. It's going to depend entirely upon the amount of spare time I have, which also itself hinges on the health and well-being of my family, which has been dire of late. So hopefully that will improve and I'll have a little more emotional capacity and time to look into what we can do. I have some ideas, but whether or not they become a reality is yet to be seen. So all that to say, thank you again for spending your time with us. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.